Washington's Smithsonian museums tell the complicated story of American history, from war to slavery and segregation.
We want the museums to talk about the history of our country in a fair manner, not in a woke manner or in a racist manner.
Upset about how that history is presented, President Donald Trump has decided to draw an ideological line in the sand.
Black history is facing a serious threat in the United States of America. The Trump administration has decided that the Smithsonian museums speak too much about slavery, and that speaking about slavery damages the image of America, tarnishes the image of America. So the administration wants to downplay black slavery and basically speak about only the quote-unquote good things in America, which is essentially rewriting American history, covering up black history. When you cover up black history, you deprive black people of knowing where they came from, why they're in the condition that they're in. But it also serves a dual purpose of assuaging white guilt and also making the white race and America itself look more pristine and better than they actually are. So this action puts down one group of people, black people in America, and elevates another group of people, being white people. This watering down of history, this whitewashing, this retelling of history is nothing new in American history. It's something that's always been done. It's very important that we preserve our pure history. Now let's examine this.
Our museums have an obligation to represent what happened in our country over the years, good and bad.
On social media, he went further, writing, "The Smithsonian is out of control, where everything discussed is how horrible our country is, how bad slavery was." He complained there's nothing about success, nothing about brightness.
So that's just a lie. Visit the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture for yourself. Essentially, the museum itself has 4 floors. Only the first floor discusses slavery, and it gives a very basic history of slavery. It doesn't even go into the insane atrocities that happened during slavery. So you start on that first floor because that's the beginning, more or less, of Black American history in the United States. And then you work your way up. And then the other 3 floors of the museum, the majority of the museum is dedicated to showing Black American accomplishments, from arts to music to theater to military service to scientific ingenuity. So it's not just all about slavery or focusing too much on slavery. Slavery is such a minor part of the museums. Trump even visited the museum himself to see this firsthand. Here he is on one of the upper floors of the museum looking at the accomplishments of Ben Carson. And on that 3rd floor, it talks about Black Americans serving in the military, it talks about Black American scientific and medical contributions to the American society. So why lie and say that these museums focus too much on slavery? The point is to water down history and to hide slavery, to somehow relieve that blot on American history and make American history seem more pristine than it actually is. Now, the person placed in charge of probing these museums and removing what's undesirable is Lindsay Halligan. Let's take a listen.
So, like just about every other country in the world, the United States has got a checkered past. I mean, what should we do in terms of our museum? Should we ignore that? Should that be massaged in a certain way to make it less significant? I mean, some of the worst episodes in our history were formative experiences that led us to where we are today, and those typically are reflected in museums.
Yep, I think the fact that we had our country was involved in slavery is awful. No one thinks otherwise.
There are people that think otherwise, and I'll show you that later in the video.
But what I saw when I was going through the museums personally was an overemphasis on slavery, and I think there should be more of an overemphasis on how far we've come since slavery.
So she said there's an overemphasis on slavery in these museums when she went through them, which is a lie, because the majority of Black history in the museums are Black accomplishments, not slavery. But the point is they want to see slavery wiped out completely in these museums so they don't have to face the reality of what happened in American society. And she had a slip of the tongue by saying we should have an overemphasis on what happened since slavery. In other words, we should have an overabundance of talking about moving forward from slavery, and not focusing on slavery at all.
Our country is a country of progress, and it's the greatest country in the world, and we should be able to take our kids, our students through the Smithsonian and feel proud when we leave.
So she just admitted the agenda right there. She doesn't want kids going through the museum, seeing the history of slavery in the museum, and quote unquote not feeling proud about their country. In other words, we need to hide the bad parts of what happened in the United States to spare people's feelings. But let's be for real, it's to spare white people's feelings. Because when black children go through the Black History Museum and learn about black history, which includes slavery, they're going to be fine. It's just black history. But when white kids see that, is what she's insinuating, they're going to have a sense of a lack of pride and have a sense of guilt. So we have to hide that from them and cover it up and rewrite the history of the United States.
There's a lot of history to our country, both positive and negative, but we need to keep moving forward. We can't just keep focusing on the negative. All it does is divide us, and we really need to unite the country and focus on all the positive as we approach America's 250th birthday.
All right, well, we'll keep watching this. We'll see how the review goes and what comes of it. Lindsay, good to catch up with you.
So you notice what she said there. It's time to move forward. We're a progressive country. It's time to progress forward and move on. In other words, forget about slavery. Let's not talk about that anymore. It's the bad part. Let's not talk about the bad part of our history. Let's only talk about the good parts and hide from that. But the funny thing about it is that people only talk about moving on and not remembering and forgetting about things when it comes to black history. Let's take a trip backwards through time. When it comes to 9/11, never forget. That was a terrible time in the United States history. Never forget, as we shouldn't, but you can forget what the Negroes went through in this country. You can forget about slavery, right? They need to get over it. Black people need to get over that and move on and progress forward. The time of the Holocaust was a terrible time for Jewish Americans in the United States. But nobody's telling them to get over it. Nobody's telling them to progress and move forward. But for black people in America, they always need to get over it and need to move forward, right? They even have Confederate Memorial Day in a lot of states, celebrated in a lot of states in the United States. Remember and honor. This is a day to celebrate all the way back there in 1861 when the southern states broke away from the northern states and the Civil War started. A war that was partially fought over slavery, and nobody's telling them to move on or progress forward or forget about that. They could celebrate their Memorial Day, their Confederate Memorial Day. Then even Columbus Day. The president recently signed a proclamation re-recognizing Columbus Day. Columbus was way back there in 1492 before black slavery even began in America. And the guy was a thief and a murderer and just an all-around scumbag that brought a lot of terror to the Americas and the indigenous people of the Americas. We don't have to forget him. We don't have to progress on from Columbus, which his expedition happened before slavery. But slavery, yes, we have to move on and progress on from that, right? Learning the history of slavery is only divisive if you make it divisive.
I think that we should include everything, including the good and the bad, and highlight the bad and see how we're learning from that.
Visited, the Lincoln Memorial, the Lincoln Monument, and what he did for slavery in this country. To think that Trump is almost disregarded now is quite sad.
We are historians first, and we care deeply about just, wanting to tell stories as accurately as possible.
And you are only going to should only feel some form of white guilt if you still have some racism you're hanging on to, or for some reason want to see black people back into slavery. But to lie and cover up history so that America could seem like some pristine country without blood on its hands, especially so you could feel better about yourself, is just not the way to do things. Here's more proof that they're trying to sweep slavery under the rug.
Independence Mall, a piece of Philadelphia history, was removed this afternoon by the federal government. Crews dismantled plaques telling the stories of the 9 enslaved people who lived in the president's house and were owned by President George Washington. Last year, President Trump ordered National Park staff to flag any displays that might be seen as disparaging to America's past. Philadelphia Mayor Sherelle Parker says the city is conducting a legal review of this tonight. An attorney who advocated for those plaques in 2010 called the removal, quote, outrageous and blatantly racist.
So you're allowed to talk about George Washington being a great man, freeing the United States from the King of England, but you're not allowed to talk about the fact that he was also a slave owner. And there are many more examples throughout the country, the United States, to water down slavery, the history of slavery, and make it seem as though it's not as bad as it actually was.
An educational video is getting a lot of attention right now for its claim that slavery was, quote, better than being killed. It was produced by PragerU, the conservative education platform the State Department of Education partnered with in 2023. They're also behind the so-called woke test now being given to certain out-of-state teachers.
Supporters of PragerU call it a pro-American education. Challengers say it's indoctrination.
So they would allow these PragerU teachings in classrooms, but they wouldn't allow critical race theory, right? If you don't know what critical race theory is, look it up for yourself. But let's find out what PragerU has to say in terms of whitewashing or hiding slavery, hiding how terrible slavery is. This is one of their cartoons for kids, and we're going to see Christopher Columbus speaking.
I'm sorry, Mr. Columbus, but I heard at school that you spoiled paradise and you brought slavery and murder to peaceful people.
The cartoon explorer defends himself, telling the children he brought Christianity and Western civilization to new lands. He calls some Indians he met highly intelligent, but describes others as vicious, warring cannibals.
So Columbus did destroy paradise. That's accurate when you read the history. I'll give you a reference in a little while. And you see how they play with the history and play on words. They had Columbus say some of the Indians were intelligent. So he's not a bad guy. He's saying some of the Indians were intelligent, giving them their flowers. But some of the Indians were cannibals, meaning that the Indians that he took out and did horrible things to, he had to. They're justifying what he did to the Indians.
The video also shows cartoon Columbus defending slavery, calling it as old as time.
Being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no? I don't see the problem.
Cartoon Columbus adding it's not fair to judge him for what our culture and society has now decided it's against, and there's only one person free of mistakes.
Only my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ is perfect.
It's just sad, man, and it's disgusting.
It's community activist J.B. Williams' take, but the material does have supporters.
I see something here that's historically accurate.
Like Broken Arrow Republican Representative Gabe Woolley, making an appearance on MSNBC just days ago to defend the content he said he showed to former students.
It can be used if you want to use it or not.
Woolley also said he believes the slavery remarks are being misconstrued.
I think what they're alluding to is that if you're still alive, you have the opportunity for change and for freedom and for reformation to come.
The video doesn't leave any room for other voices. The video doesn't leave any room for us to even assume anything else but that what happened was okay. And none of it was okay.
And remember, after Columbus and his men wiped out the native Indians, they brought over black slaves in their stead to work the land. One of the best books you can ever get concerning the history of Columbus and the atrocities he committed against the native Indians is Juan Ponce de Leon by Sean Dolan. That's Juan Ponce de Leon by Sean Dolan. And here's some white people that believe slavery wasn't quote unquote that bad. This mentality of hiding slavery or watering it down isn't just a Trump administration thing. This is a thing that's prolific throughout a lot of white societies or white communities. Not all, but a lot of them.
Well, some people would say that flag symbolizes racism. It symbolizes slavery.
Yeah, but maybe he really, really likes slavery.
And they might have some valid points there.
That's their opinion. You know, they're welcome to their opinion if they want it.
Are you pro-slavery or against slavery?
I have no comment.
I told you, everybody doesn't think that it's a bad thing.
I'll give you one more chance. Pro or anti-slavery?
No comment.
I'll give you one more opportunity to say if you're pro or anti-slavery.
No comment.
All right, well, there you have it.
Still had better lives here than they did back in Africa.
As slaves, they had better lives here.
There are some that would argue that. You can look that up. Their descendants, the descendants of those slaves, have much better lives here than the descendants of people who would have never gotten on those slave boats in Africa. And that's a provable fact, you know, because we have given them all those freedoms.
So the old black people were better off because we put them into slavery argument because we gave them a better life. That's just a lie. You could read a book, The Life of Elado Equiano, which this was a young man that was kidnapped from Africa and brought into slavery, and he speaks about his life in Africa, showing you that when blacks lived in Africa, they lived a good life. Black people weren't just living in the jungles, running around naked, etc., etc. And you could also read this book, From Slavery to Freedom, which it also talks about how blacks lived in Africa before they were captured and put into slavery, how they were towns, governments, and so on and so on. And in the future, I'm going to do a video on how life was in Africa before the slave catchers came, the white men as the slave catchers came and began the Atlantic slave trade.
Undoubtedly many nice slaveholders in the South. This is not meant facetiously, again, it's meant literally. If you had been invited to one of their homes, you would have been treated beautifully, but they supported a vicious system.
An attempt to make slave masters seem like they're not vicious people. They might have been nice to fellow white people, but if they were so nice, why didn't they free their black slaves instead of keeping them like human cattle? These clips, by the way, are from the YouTube channel, the Young Turks, and I'll leave a link in the description below. Then they also try to dilute, water down, or hide the history of slavery, dilute it through the textbooks. So you have to watch your kids' textbooks and see what they're teaching about black history. This is an NPR article, and the title of it reads, "Why Calling Slaves quote-unquote workers is more than an editing error." So in the textbook, this particular textbook, they found that they call the slaves workers. Slaves and workers are two completely different things, obviously. But then the publishers claimed that it was a publishing error, why it was like this, which is obviously not true. How do you make that big a mistake? They were just trying to see what they could get away with until some black parents called them out on it. This is an example from another textbook. This is an LA Times article. It says, Texas, the title, Texas textbook calling slaves quote-unquote immigrants to be changed after mom's complaint. So in this textbook, they were calling the slaves quote-unquote immigrants. The black slaves that came over in slavery during the transatlantic slave trade weren't immigrants. They didn't get on the ship and voluntarily come over here like the other ethnic groups and other nationalities, the French, the Dutch, the Germans, etc. They were violently ripped from their homes, put on cargo slave ships where they were stowed like cargo in the bottom of the ships, dragged over here. They were robbed, unalived. They had, negative sexual things done to them. I'm trying to keep the language clean. Sold as property, separated from their children, and all these different things that they went through when they came here. So to try to make it out and water down the history like they were just normal, regular immigrants like anyone else that immigrated here, like the Italians or the Irish or so on, is just nonsense. But this is how they play with the history. If black people are just going to allow white people to cover up the atrocities of their ancestors or water down history, then we won't understand why things are the way they are today. And then anyone could tell us anything and lie about the past and create their own narrative to make themselves look good and make us look terrible. A few examples are, why are some black neighborhoods so poor? Is it just that black people are degenerates, or did something else happen in the past to create these poor black neighborhoods? Is there a history behind it? Why do black students in general get poor educations? Why are white men at the top of the financial food chain, etc. in the United States? Is it because of some incredible acumen, or is there a different story behind it? The best way to not be deceived, subjugated, and taken advantage of is to stay educated.
There's a lot of history to our country, both positive and negative, but we need to keep moving forward. We can't just keep focusing on the negative. All it does is divide us, and we really need to unite the country and focus on all the positive.
In the United States of America, you don't have to apologize for being white anymore.